What I do know is that sitting down there along the border in El Paso is our good friend Jeff Welton. And I'm so pleased to have him back with us today. And the topic is one that I think is going to be real interesting to those of you that are doing HD radio or thinking about it. And just,
We're first adjacent to one.
well, yeah, that makes a really good point. I saw somebody comment the other day about how um, if you don't do it at the right order, you can end up having more interference than you would like to have. So,
I'm not sure what that means.
well, if apparently the way it works with the commission, if you are first to put that minus 14 in there, let's say, and then another station looks at it, they may find that that's too high, but the commission won't knock it back down.
Oh, okay. I think I got what you're saying. So yeah, so if I applied for minus 10 and somebody and I mean it would so minus 14, everybody except the super bees can do minus 14 right now. That one is not restricted. That's been the case since 2017, I think. Oh, there, and Mary's got the answer on the quorum of the commission over in the chat too, by the way. Um, so it's when you get above minus 14, and that's why, although they issued the rulemaking last November, it's, I don't think, officially been published, although it may be now. Um, and then they had all the caveats, like if you're above 107 or 107.3, you can't do anything on your upper sideband because, which is funny because you could do up to except for 107.9. If you had a 107.7, you could do the experimental license with minus 10 on your upper sideband, but now you cannot. Or you can't do it under the new ruling, which just says you can go there and just fill in the digital notification. Um, and that's where this gets so bizarre, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. That's the phrase I'm going to use. Of course, there are so many things that fit that category. I'm going to throw a screen share up. I mean, the math to do this is the same 50-50 contour stuff that we've been doing forever. There are arguments about power versus channel bandwidth and whether or not it should not. I put the slide up this way because then you can see my presenter notes on it too. But assuming I shared the right screen, that's the one that it came up on. You're looking at the one with the PowerPoint slide deck?
Yes, sir.
Yay. So that's the basic math behind it. And it's, like I say, it's not that big a deal in that regard. Where it becomes an issue, and I'm sure there's going to be at least one person here, because the channel power gets impacted much more if you do crank up your digital sidebands and there's somebody on that adjacent with an analog signal. It is going to impact them on the fringes. There's no question. I mean, especially at minus 10, a an HD signal at minus 10 dB will typically outrun the analog for that station. It'll go further as a rule. I mean, there may be some terrain situations where that's not the case, but it's the exception. Um, so that it is something to be aware of, and that's why I put the caveat that is somebody on your first adjacent, or I think lesser the second, but more the first, is running HD and you're not, you definitely want to pay attention to that thing. There is a process in place for complaint resolution if there's any interference, and it's a really good idea to familiarize yourself with that. So here are the HD guys saying, yeah, but And that's the case. I mean, the cool thing is it's pretty easy. I mean, you can go through and do all these calculations, or you can just, I'm going to flip over to our website. Hopefully. Oh, look at that. I love it when a plan comes together. And then that's the advantage of sharing screen instead of sharing app. I can just let you see everything that's on there. But if you go into our RF toolkit, we don't, it says sign in with NUG, but it's not restricted to Nautel customers only, and we don't track it. I'll rephrase: we do track it. We don't do anything with it. You will never get an email from me as a result of this. But if you go to the RF toolkit, we've got beyond the coverage tool that we've talked about here before, the path plotter and RF coverage, we've got an HD radio calculator. And let's see, let's use KVSC, St. Cloud. That's Alex Hartman's station. Let's see. So if you go down and hit that, you can see that they're able to go -10 on their lower sideband, and it tells you who's limiting them on the upper, and what the DU ratios are on the contours. So it's pretty good for that. Now I'm going to quantify this. Although this is provided to us and hosted by Cavell Mertz, and they do a pretty good job of keeping the database updated, it is not a replacement for having a consultant do the actual math. Okay, I would not just do this and say, okay, good, turn my HD up and then file the digital permission. You'd actually want to get a consultant to do that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, well, like I said, just because I saw it on the internet doesn't mean it's true. Uh,
Well, I saw where you were the best radio guy in the industry.
See, case in point, right there. Uh, so yeah, I mean, you can look on the website, and I say we don't charge to use this. It's just a convenience thing. It's fairly frequently updated. Anybody got a construction permit that may or may not be in here yet? You hit me with a call sign for? Nobody wants to fess up to it. I just want to see how current it is.
No construction permit, but I have a recently licensed station.
Go ahead, Jerry.
KTFL.
All right. TFL. So we hit search and we'll find out how current this information is. And I go yell at Gary Cavell if it doesn't play. There you go, -13 on your lower, thanks to KPBZ in Spokane, -10 on your upper.
I'm KPBZ too.
And I already know you've got a NUG login, so there we go. 10 on both sidebands, the only one that even comes close. And it tells you that KTFL is close, but no cigar. The ratio, I believe, was 51 dB. Let me get back over there. 51.2. And for -10, 49.5 or less, and you're at 47.8. So, yep, you'd be okay there. Now, there's a situation, though, if you lit up KPBZ at -10 on both sidebands, I would expect the fringe coverage at KTFL to suffer. Now, that's outside of the protected contour, so as far as the FCC's complained, you don't have a leg to stand on for a complaint, but it's worth being aware of it.
Yeah, I own both of them, so.
No, there you go. You stepping on yourself, that's your own issue. I step on my own toes all the time.
Okay, let's jump back about half a step, Jeff, and explain, if you would, in English or or Canadian, uh, what an asymmetrical sideband is here.
All right.
I mean, you're showing it to us, but let's.
So basically, when you look at the HD signal, you've got let's see, I think one of the best ways to look at that, I'm going to cheat and go to Dave Anderson's Facebook page because I saw he did a post on something like this, and I think it was on, let's see, maybe he did. There, no, that's his analog. Okay, well, that'll work good enough for now. So if you're looking at the spectrum, Your digital carriers are upper and lower sidebands on literally on your first adjacents. Rich will appreciate the in-band other channel, because yeah, I know I'm not calling it the other name you use for it, but that's all right. Anyway, so as a rule, the default originally was 20 dB down, so that would be 20 dB down from carrier on the first adjacents. He's got the analog mask up there too. I'm gonna have to go grab a better one. Just one moment. Let's go back to that for a sec while I take a look. Might have a waveform in here. There we go. That'll work. Okay. So the original default was the digital sidebands were 20 dB down, or digital power is 1% of analog power. Now, that's the aggregate total, so each sideband is going to be 3 dB lower than that because it's only half. So you're going to see minus 23 on a spectrum analyzer on both sides for a minus 20 dB total. Okay, follow that so far?
Yep.
Because I'm trying to, like I said, I've been doing this long enough that sometimes I just start talking and stop thinking about whether it's easy to understand or not. So around about 2017 or so, it was announced that anybody, and I say 2017, I'm throwing a dart at a board. I could be wrong. But several years ago, they said everybody can do minus 14 except for the couple dozen super Bs, the overpowered class B stations. Say there's only a couple of dozen of them in the country. Everybody else could do minus 14. So at minus 14, your digital power is 4% of your analog. Okay. And again, the same caveat with the minus 3 on each sideband to give you the aggregate. So 17 left, 17 or 17 lower, 17 upper gives you 14 total. Now, with the asymmetry, because then they decided, well, maybe we can go to minus 10. Well, that became an interference issue, as if nothing else before was. It became a much more serious interference issue. So then they said, well, in some cases, if you've got an adjacent on your lower sideband, for example, then you could turn up your upper and go to minus 10 instead of doing minus 10 on both sides and just stomping all over the other station everywhere. In really frequency dense areas, the New York Northeast Metro, or the Northeast Corridor in general, and a good chunk of the Southwest, there's still going to be some interference. Chicago, I know they've run into a few. So asymmetry can help alleviate that to some extent as well. And that was the whole reason for it. The other thing and the reason for doing it at all is because, as far as the receiver's concerned, if it gets a digital carrier on that frequency, it will unlock the receiver, and it can usually pull the other sidebands out of the grass, out of the noise floor. Or it'll just get the data on that sideband, which is still going to unlock the receiver and give you, at the very least, a solid audio signal. May not be the full stereo high fidelity of double sidebands, but they do interleave a lot of the data. So, it's from that perspective, and to give you the coverage, my general coverage contour, and oh, by the way, 10 dB is 10%. That's just a given. So 10% of analog power. But to the general coverage for HD is that a 20 dB signal is good for lighting up a translator, but useless for developing an HD audience, because it won't even cover your city grade contour, your 60 dBu. And you are going to have a lot of people complaining about it dropping out as they go behind buildings or over hills or whatever. 14 dBc, or 4% of the analog, will give you solid city grade. In most cases, there's going to be some shaped by terrain or whatever, multipath, etc. But it'll typically give you solid city grade coverage with the digital signal, and it'll start to drop out a little bit before the analog on the fringes. So that one is pretty good for anybody in like if you've got a small town with a bunch of fields or a city with not a lot of suburbs and not a lot of fringes. 14 dB is usually plenty. Minus 10 in most cases. And again, I'm caveating everything with most and sometimes and usually because there are always exceptions. But for the most part, a minus 10 dBc signal will outperform the analog as far as listenable coverage. And the cool thing about HD, because it's digital, it's there or it's not. Now I say cool thing. I don't like to listen to static, so you know, it's good like that. If you can get it, you can. If you can't, you can't. The other good thing about it is because it does have interleaf carriers on upper and lower sidebands, a receiver in a high multipath area will usually do better decoding and listening to an HD signal than it would the analog. Like I know I've come down I-95 in between, well, anywhere through New York City. The multipath's so bad that you can't hardly listen to any analog station, or I couldn't on the receiver on my Cherokee a couple of years ago. On an HD receiver, I can usually lock stuff in and listen all the way through. Now, if I want to listen to the analog on the first adjacent, nope, that's even worse. So, again, I've weaponized HD and used it to eliminate translators on first adjacents before. So, and that was purely done because whoever owned the translator was trying to identify as the station that was because they were hit and seek first. Anyway, long story, but yeah, you can use the interference to your advantage in some cases, but it is a situation. You're muted, Barry.
Sorry about that.
No worries,
In,
man. I
in,
saw your lips moving.
yeah. Oh boy. In the old days, you had to have a second transmitter. So
Uh-huh.
you were burning a lot of power up in dummy loads.
Oh, shit ton. And I don't mind that went on the recorded. That would be a metric shit ton, by the way.
I see.
But but yeah, no, the old days, and there are multiple ways of combining. And since I've got this slide deck open, let me just take a quick scroll up to, I got to remember where I put it. Right about there. So yeah, way back in the good old days, you had a high level injection with a combiner that dumped 90% of your digital power into a reject load along with 10% of your analog power. And so it was great for contributing to heating the outdoors, but assuming your reject load was outside, it was great to contributing to your air conditioning bill if you were foolish enough to have it inside. But it was not incredibly efficient by a long shot. It did require more space. The advantage was if you had a fairly solid tube transmitter or solid state non HD capable transmitter with 10% power headroom, then you didn't have to buy a whole new big transmitter. So it had that benefit. The downside, everything in red is a downside. The other downside is that it absolutely did not lend itself to changing the injection level of the HD signal. So that would require reconfiguring the entire combiner, which got spendy really fast. So, if the early adopters, and most of the early adopters did this in 2004, 2005. So we're into 20 years ago. A lot of these systems are being replaced now. Now, of course, this is radio where we expect to have our prime moneymaker being run by a 40-year-old transmitter. So, I'm a sales guy. My truck is absolutely not 40 years old, although some days I wish it was. But anyway, that's a side note. So that is slowly going away, but there are still quite a few out there. The other option for two transmitters was to do space combining, where you just put your digital transmitter on another antenna, either on the same tower or very closely. And their FCC's got guidelines on how far you can go on height difference on the tower and or on a different tower, how far apart they could be. It's not very. That is probably still the most efficient way to do HD. The downside to it is that unless your two antennas are exactly matched for pattern, then you're going to run into pattern issues where, as you go away in the near field, you got the peaks and the nulls as you go away from a tower on an FM signal. Well, if you have a digital peak on an analog null because the two patterns aren't exactly matched, like a 4-bay versus a 3-bay or whatever, then you're going to create a lot of self-interference in that case. And if your site happens to be in the middle of your coverage area, like in the middle of your population zone, so right in town or whatever, then this is definitely not recommended, because for the few miles around the tower, there's going to be places where you're stepping on yourself. Now, if your site's a mile or two, couple miles out of town, and there's not a lot around it but a field, this is absolutely the way to go, especially if you own the tower. If you're leasing space, it adds more cost because you're more real estate on the tower. So again, everything is a judgment call on this stuff. You got to do the cost analysis on all of it, both acquisition and operation. So if it costs me 20 times as much to install and only saves me a couple of $100 a month on the power bill, I'm probably going to go with a different solution. But that's one thing to be aware of. The other one, the one the transmitter guy likes because I get to sell you a bigger box, is the hybrid situation, where it's just everything's combined in the exciter, goes up through the amplifiers and out the pipe and up into all running into the same antenna. You do have to pay attention to the power and voltage peaks, because the digital carriers are amplitude modulated. And I know I see more than a few AM folks in the audience, so you all understand that when you get an amplitude modulated signal, we're looking at peak envelope power. And that means that like a 1 kilowatt digital signal has got a 4 kilowatt PEP, or peak envelope power. So if I've got a 10 kilowatt analog and I want to put or minus 10 or 1 kilowatt of digital, 10%, now I've got to deal with 14 kilowatts of power going up that pipe. And if my antenna bay is rated for a 10 kilowatt input, things are going to get very melty very fast. And now the transmitter guy doesn't care, because I just sold you a transmitter. And, if you burned up your antenna, that's on you. But it's important to do that math as well. And you've got to look at both peak power and peak voltage, depending on what we're talking about. Elbows, coax, antenna bays, that peak voltage is sometimes a bigger concern. And sorry, go, Barry.
Yeah, this is Harold. In this application, the amplifier is linear as opposed to Class C that could be used in other combining methods.
Very, very much. And that's the last red point on that slide. The higher the injection, the more linear we need to make it, which means the lower the efficiency. So to give a general, and this will vary, of course, from manufacturer to manufacturer. I mean, between us, Gates, Air, and Rode, and BE, the numbers will be a little different from one to another. But as a rule, we're seeing in analog only, our nominal overall AC to RF efficiency is 72%. I think Gates Air is claiming typical or up to 75. So in that 72 to 75 range. When you add HD for us at 20 dB, again, just to drive a translator, we stay pretty close. It's at 70% overall. Now, here, let me flip back to the website, go to products, because I can do this a whole lot easier than trying to remember it. There, we just pick one of ours. And if I scroll way, way down and hit a spec sheet, oh, no, that's not what I wanted. I want the brochure. Brochure, not an English Air, GV series. This brochure is useful because it gives us all of the options in an extremely overwhelming, and you're going to have to forgive the crap hotel internet, although it's not as bad as it could be. It's holding this conversation up pretty well. All right, down at the very bottom of the brochure, there. So zoom in a little bit on that. So the efficiency, as you can see, if I looking at -20, I've got 70% overall. Then it's pretty consistent across the board, so I'm not going to nitpick. As I linearize to go to like -14, now we're down to 60%. If I go to -10, we're down to 55%. And if I go digital only, it can drop down to a little less again. Now, not much difference these days in the older transmitters, the NV series. If you went digital only, you were down to 25, 30%. So yeah, that is absolutely something else to consider. Again, when you're figuring out how you combine with your cost of operation versus cost of ownership, it's very much going to be a factor.
So with newer transmitters, then
Mm-hmm.
you make the adjustment in the exciter as to which sideband gets how much power.
So for us, and I can't speak to Gates Air, Rode, or BE, or any of the others that are making HD. Obviously, I only know our boxes. The adjustment is made in the software and the exciter. The only change you do is in the front panel. You just tell it in the preset menu, yeah, I'm running HD. I want this much on this sideband and this much on that sideband. And it's like, cool, got you covered. Do you want your optimizer turned on, or are you going to figure that out yourself? And that's just for group delay correction.
Well, that makes it a lot more easy to do.
Right, right. And I mean, like I say, different manufacturers do it different ways. So just understand that I can only speak to our boxes because they're the ones I work on. But yeah, there are different levels of pre-correction too. I think we're all using a variant of adaptive pre-correction at this point, so that the digital, what's the fancy word? Spectral regrowth. It's digital intermod. It's literally intermodulation. The digital carriers interfere with the analog carriers, makes those little bumps on the shoulders of the HD signal. And we do a lot of different pre-corrections. Some folks have pre-selected algorithms. Some the pre-correction is configured into a 50 ohm load on at manufacturer time. So talk to your manufacturer about how they do that. That's going to be different for everybody. With us, we just use a lot of computer power to analyze the output and constantly adjust the pre-distortion to keep it as optimal as possible. The trade-offs: as you improve your mask clearance, because you've done more linearization, you have decreased your efficiency. So sometimes you can do a trade-off. Like if your mask clearance is stellar, you got a really good load, and everything is 4 or 5 dB below the minimums specified by the FCC, then we've got the ability to relax that a little bit, take out a little bit of the linearity, and improve the efficiency by some points and save the power bill a little bit. Now, I can't speak again to the other manufacturers. That's something to ask them. But it is just, with the computer power, there's a lot more stuff we can do as manufacturers these days than we could do 20 years ago in the early iterations.
This may not be a fair question, but I'll ask it anyway.
I'm always willing to drop back and punt.
So give us a rough financial cost to change from the earliest two transmitter system or the more recent system. Just a ballpark figure for how much to add asymmetry would be.
It's not that it's not a fair question, it's that it doesn't have an answer. Well, because it depends on transmitter power. It depends, I mean, a 5 kilowatt transmitter is going to cost you a whole lot less than a 40 kilowatt transmitter, or a 60 or an 80. If you're running a 25 kilowatt analog signal with a tube rig, and you've got a separate, because your digital transmitter in that case would have had to be, let's see, 25 kilowatts at 20 dB. 1% of that is 250 watts. So you would have needed, at least in those early days, about a 10 kilowatt digital transmitter to create the 250-watt digital signal because you're dumping 90% of the power into the load. And again, I'm rounding off, doing this off the top of my head. So,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
somebody's writing it down and fact checking me, feel free to step in and say, no, your math's wrong. But I heard that giggle. Oh, Mr. Doherty, you're on your side, buddy. But that's what happens. See, you make a sound and now
I'm in
you're
the
on the
car.
big screen. But
Yeah, I'm in the car. Sorry.
okay. But yeah, the very much the cost will vary. I mean, a fully loaded digital 40 kilowatt hybrid system is ballpark 150, 160 grand. And I mean, I'm throwing a dart at a board. I haven't got our price list memorized and I don't pretend to. A 40 kilowatt analog only transmitter is going to be about 110 grand. So the price difference is about 50 grand in that case. And again, it'll vary somewhat depending on transmitter power, but like an analog to digital and everything, I mean, everything we built forever for HD will do some level of asymmetry, even back to the NV10s. V series, I would not recommend it. Those were tenuous in their linearity at best. But on the NV series, you can do some asymmetry. We will not pretend to know what the max analog TPO you can get for any level of asymmetry is. I can guess and get you a pretty good estimate, but the only way you're going to find out is to connect it.
Well, let me rephrase it a little bit then. Let's take a 100 kilowatt radio station.
Sure.
And they're running I don't know, 8-bay antenna. So
8-bay full wave, nominal gain of 4, so you got about a 15 kilowatt transmitter, give or take.
something like that. So now there's going to be two questions. One, will you take the old transmitter back?
Nope.
And
some might, but we absolutely will not. I mean, if anything, I had to hook you up with one of our. We've got relationships with a few brokers that will buy used gear, but I can promise you, almost nobody will take a tube transmitter in trade anymore from the brokerage. I don't think. I'd have to check some of them.
maybe something going to South America, but that's another story altogether. So here we are. We've got a 20 kilowatt transmitter, and you just gave a number for a 40. But I'd say more often you're going to watch somebody with a 20, maybe 25. And so the question would be, where would that cost factor be?
So again,
just a rough ballpark.
Right, but I mean, you're asking me like, what's the price of gas in the United States? It could be anywhere. In the past week, I've seen it at 3.40 a gallon, and I've seen it at 2.40 a gallon. So it's hard to make a rough ballpark with that big a range. But let me grab. Let's see. So 20 kilowatt transmitter. I mean, if you're running an old high-level injected system, you're not going to be able to use that injector. Keep the digital transmitter that you've got already. Odds are it can be configured for hybrid operation as a full backup. Then you're looking at a new 20 kilowatt with the HD gear, because the HD gear has also evolved a pile. Assuming the stuff from 20 years ago is still working, most of it is not. So, because they're computers, and I mean, we're not running a lot, not a lot, not none, but not a lot of 20-year-old computers in our facilities these days.
Well, now, wait a minute. This is going to go way off the corner.
This is where I go with everything I do. Why would I stop now?
You folks have the reputation of supporting everything, going back to the MFETs, although...
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying we don't support it. I'm just saying you're not going
expensive to
support
it. Yeah, it can be very expensive to support it or upgrade it. So, again, if somebody is using one of those transmitters, is it really financially viable at 20 years of age or 30 years of age to do this, or should they be budgeting to move up to a newer transmitter? You're a salesman, I understand.
So again, the same thing I said earlier on. If you're relying on a 20 or 30-year-old transmitter as the primary moneymaker, the revenue driver for your station, that's kind of frightening. I mean, I tell folks, well, 20 years, not so much, but I tell folks as a rule, I mean, well, and one of the things I tell people flat out is the day to start budgeting for a replacement transmitter is the day you buy this one. But that's true for everything from the microphone to the antenna. You should start budgeting the replacement the day you buy one. And at that point, I mean, transmitters, I shoot for, used to be a 15-year, these days finances being what they are, 20-year life cycle. So you should be budgeting for a 20-year life cycle regardless, whether you're doing HD, analog, run a tube, solid state, I don't care. Now, having said that, realistically, most people just don't have that kind of revenue. So yeah, you do what you got to do. But on a 30-year-old box, well, a 30-year-old box, you're not doing HD on that anyway. It would be the analog only transmitter in a high-level system. And if you want more HD, your only option is to go to a new system. Whether you do separate antennas or a hybrid transmitter, that's up to you. So let's take a look. And
All right. So now again, I'm just going to take you around the bend. Suppose you've got a 20-year-old.
Yep.
I don't know, it's NV GV something.
Yeah.
And you want to go to HD. Can you just put the new exciter in and accept that you won't get the full 100 kilowatts out of it?
So if you've got an NV series, you don't need a new exciter. You just need the XGen board to go in the exciter. You absolutely can upgrade it to HD. And yeah, you do have to pay attention to the power headroom because, again, the digital carriers are amplitude modulated. So like there's the other thing. If you look at that chart that I've left on the screen, it will tell you the maximum power. And we do this a couple of different ways because we did everything by average power always. So if your analog power is this, we do this and assume the digital carriers at whatever level we said. Well, one of our competitors was publishing total power. And so when they were publishing total average power as their number, they're like, look, we can do more power than Nautel because we're using apples and oranges. So that's why we put this big old chart with all the options in there and just to level the playing field. But so if you look at your 20 kilowatt transmitter as an example, it's going to do at minus 14, 18.5 kilowatts in MP1 mode, 18 kilowatts in MP3 mode. And that's just how many digital carriers we're adding. All right. So if we've got an 18 kilowatt TPO, then I could absolutely crack that up to minus 14 from minus 20 without even thinking about it. If I've got an 18.5 kilowatt TPO, then I might have to consider going to a bigger transmitter. So that's what I say. It's hard for me to give an average when almost every situation is different.
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
and what I'm
And for what it's worth, a GV2-20, not counting the importer exporter, assuming you use the one you already had, it's going to be about $100,000.
so what I'm prompting you for, and maybe it's unfair, but some stations that want to move up into HD might accept a power reduction, at least for a temporary period of time.
And that, again, is situational and it's a judgment call. So
That's why they want to talk to their consultant. They want to talk to you, and
Yep.
they want to talk to Mary.
right. And it's one of the things, like if somebody tells me they want to do HD, I will give them the ballpark coverage estimates that I gave you. Because typically when I'm doing this, I'm talking to a GM or an owner who doesn't necessarily speak DBC or DBM or DBU or DB anything. So that would be DBA, by the way, except that's already been taken also. So for them, I'll give them the 2014-10 coverage as far as translator, city grade, better than analog. And then I'll look at their TPO and say, for your TPO, we could do this many dB with this level transmitter. If you want this many, you need this transmitter. And this one will cost you about this much, and that one will cost you about that much. And what fits your budget, we'll figure it out from there.
So
So
if you just wanted to go into the -20, somebody that's never been on HD
sure.
and they want to just change the exciter out.
And that depends what they've got. If it's not one of our boxes, I won't quote HD gear for it.
No, no.
Not to upgrade an exciter from an analog. I will replace the HD exporter importer in an existing system with one of our boxes, because at that point you just have to reassign port numbers.
And again, so the question is that they could conceivably get on with HD for a relatively small amount of money if they want to do that. But if they really want to run the whole thing up here to a -10 and
Well, and again, situational. I mean, a lot of the NVs were specifically sold with the goal of having HD compatibility down the road. So in a lot of cases, the headroom was left at purchase time 20 years ago. And same with the NV lights now. I mean, our NV lights, and I know the fax analog, and I can't speak to Rode or BE on that one, but most of their gear is capable of being upgraded to HD. So a lot of times, if you bought it 20 years ago, we don't want to do HD now, but we might someday. It will depend on how well the sales guy had that conversation about coverage area and TPO.
I thought the LTs would not do it.
Oh yeah, they will. No, the VXs are the only ones we build that will not do HD.
Okay.
So yeah, any NVA light, I've already upgraded serial number 1 of the NV10 LT to HD.
And there's another factor too that isn't real well known, I assume, and that is that several of your models come with the same output network and everything, and you software control the maximum TPO.
Yeah, sort of. But yeah, so like
if
any odd number, like a 15, a 7.5, let's see, okay, 3.5 is a 5, 7.5 is a 10, 15 is a 20. The 30 full size is a 40, but not the 30 end.
So in other words, what we're saying, if they want to consider it, they may be able to do something. It again depends on the situation, exactly what you say. But
there are a lot of times
factors.
when I'll quote a 15 with the knowledge and informing the customer that if you do decide to go HD and you want more than the bare minimum, that we'll want to upgrade this to a 20, but we can do that in the field.
Exactly.
Yeah, and in that case, we just replace the controller because that's what tells it what the power level is, and then do the HD upgrade, and away you go. So yeah, there are frequently options in that regard, and it will vary again from one manufacturer and one site to another. So it's always good to pay attention or ask the questions, I guess should be the better way of putting it.
Okay. Speaking of questions, does anyone have a question for Jeff about what we've been discussing or your particular situation? And
you've got about 10 minutes before I shut down and disappear. But this is a topic I get passionate about, so it's not hard to keep me rolling.
Somewhat off.
I knew your mouth was moving. What was that, Rich?
Have you forgotten the more technical term for IBOC?
Oh, I have not forgotten anything. I remember everything all the way back to the original days. And I don't necessarily disagree with the iBuzz. However, I will quantify that. And I mean, what you're listening to is digital carriers on an analog receiver. And yeah, that's not going to change. And as the digital carriers increase, that'll get worse. I don't know the solution to that. Oh, well, I do know the solution to that. At some point, we need to do what we did with television and just sunset the analog totally, which should have really been done 10, 15 years ago, and then we wouldn't even be in this discussion. But here we are.
Now, what sort of transmitter would a station need if they did decide to go digital only?
So digital only, would be the same transmitters. There has been absolutely no discussion about what power level you would get. It's like I just said a little bit ago, a 10 dB signal, 10% of the digital power will cover greater range than 100% of the analog power in most cases. So would you really need in that case a 50 kilowatt ERP digital only, or would you rather have a 5 kilowatt ERP covering a slightly greater territory at a quarter of the power bill? So that's where that discussion has not happened at all at this point, and it really does need to.
Hmm.
And it's also way beyond my pay grade, but there you go.
Any other questions?
On that subject, it's my understanding that the digital only does move it entirely within the channel. Is that correct?
That's AM. On MP, sorry, with AM it's MA1 and MA3, and on MA3 digital only for AM, you're totally back within the 10 kilohertz band. So
Okay.
yeah, you get on AM, you get rid of all the adjacent sideband stuff.
Okay, that's not the case on the FM though.
Well, on FM, remember that the digital carriers are amplitude modulated. So in a digital only signal, all we do is remove the analog component in the middle and just fill it with the more digital carriers.
Okay, and so they're still
But
out there on
but
the
on,
adjacent channels rather than just being moved in.
correct.
Okay, and then on transmitter efficiency, I've been reading old patents, including Leonard Kahn's 1950 something patent on envelope extraction and reinsertion.
Uh-huh.
And I understand that's being used now in cellular transmitters. Anything going on in that direction to linearize broadcast transmitters?
We have done some experimental stuff. If you hit our website, I don't know if we've got anything on the site. Let me get up here real quick. I need to get back to the main page there. And I want to be in the search bar. Let's see, Philip called it multicast, I think. Might be multiplex. No, multiplex. We did do some COFDM interleaved carrier multiple signals on one transmitter. Like we've proven that we can run, as an example, up to 15 audio channels on 3 adjacent frequencies. So there is a little bit in there. There's some discussion of the press release on it. But the big challenge as you move further apart, like if I wanted to do an 88.1 and a 107.1 in the same transmitter, the linearization you need to suppress the intermod products means that your efficiency drops down into the single digits. So physics wise, we can generate the signal. I mean, that's just FFT in a computer, but the amplification becomes the challenge.
Thank you.
Sure.
I had a comment on sunsetting analog on FM. You know,
I can't imagine.
That's been done in Europe quite a bit. I don't know, Norway or something. Everybody goes, ah, well, we ain't Norway, okay? And they had DAB up in parallel to much better performance, to the point where when they turned the analog FM off, nobody really cared anymore.
Now, and quantify that. So DAB is only better performance insofar as it's delivered over the L band by satellite, or well, not by satellite, but high frequency with pods. For us,
this is
especially
VHF around 220 megahertz.
But
DAB.
okay, yeah, that's DRM.
That's mainly Europe, right?
Yeah.
And that's much superior here, but we never allocated that spectrum to it.
Right. And there are other reasons that had its challenges. And I mean, we can build that gear too if we had to, but
we can't get the spectrum.
Right. And I mean,
at least not
whether
from this
you use
220 ham band guy.
But whether you use that or whether you do L band at 1.5 was a no go because of the coverage. I mean, it was terrible. And in flyover country, nobody could afford to run 6 transmitter sites instead of just one.
My comment on that was
Yeah.
that'll never happen here. Another point I wanted to make when
you
were
did it
doing
to
tricks.
television.
Pardon?
You sunsetted analog television.
Well, yeah, but you had replacement frequencies and you had mandates to, people
No, I know.
receivers.
I'm just
That's the
saying.
old ATSC 3 versus 1 versus analog. That's another book.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
what are the-
And again, I'm not pro or con either way. I'm just saying that it could be done
Yeah.
if they really wanted to. The question is, do we really want to?
So let me take you back to my childhood, about 2008. I did 17 FMs and 9 TVs, upgrade to digital at GPV. And we put new solid state FMs in, some of them 100 kilowatt ERP, and all of them low level IBOC. Okay. So at the time, the Harris that we used could hit 10 kilowatt analog TPO. All right.
Right.
With running at the time, the old low power symmetric sidebands. The stuff you're talking about today hadn't even been thought of yet. And I don't know what they did with that since I've
Right.
been. But one or two of our sites, we actually took that 10 kilowatt and then reverse engineered new antennas to bring it back to 100 kilowatt on the analog and so forth, and kind of settled for whatever it would do for digital. And my crown jewel was in Savannah. We moved it to the TV tower in Pembroke. We went all vertical, directional, up 500 more feet on the tower and hit Savannah just beautifully.
Yeah.
So that's a whole bunch of things that solved a whole bunch of problems there, but I still brag about that.
Well, and that's what I said. I mean, everything. It's when Barry's trying to pin me down on an average. Everything is so situational that I really hesitate to say that it'll be this much all the time, even as a ballpark.
Actually, DAB would not work here. It was suggested in New York years ago, and the big 50s, of which I was one, objected very strongly because that would basically equalize all signals.
And see, that was a complete nutter. Whoever represented that did it very poorly because that wasn't true.
That's a business comment, Rich.
Well, what you did, you had multiple pods that were all interleaved and multiplexed, so that similar to the way cell transmission works, so that I could have put a Class C on all 6 pods or all 6 transmitter sites in that network, and put the Class A on only one. And as far as that goes, I could have interleaved a couple of pods to recreate a directional signal. You might not have had as much granularity as you do with Class A to Class C right now, but absolutely, it didn't have to be a level playing field. That was just how it was presented.
Well, yeah, it was a single transmitter site.
Right, and DAB on 220 would have probably, again, though, but the L-band DAB, though, that was done in pods. Like Toronto, they had to put 6 pods up to come close to what 150 kilowatt off the CN tower would cover. So, in that case, you put a Class A in Burlington onto that pod. You put a Class A in Grimsby onto that pod. You put a Class A in Stouffville onto that pod. And the Class C runs on all of them.
Hey, Rich, on iHeartRadio, they're all equalized on the internet. Right.
Hey, Jeff, one of the reasons that that digital plan did not work was the NAB was trying to monetize it. And that's what really killed it, because I remember running the meeting in New York where all the station owners just attacked the NAB for doing it at that time.
Yeah. And that is one of the biggest challenges. Because, and I say we can do a whole lot of he said, she said, as far as what has has been done wrong in the past, but for where we're at now, it's not a bad system. There's pros and cons to it, and it doesn't play great. I mean, most of the DRM plus proponents forget the DRM plus isn't all digital all the time. system, which was shot down here because, as we've just discussed, nobody wanted to get rid of all those billions of analog radios. Anyway, on that note, I do have to disappear, but thanks, Barry, for having me.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for especially knowing that you've found yourself in the middle of the country and still took the time to be with us. We're grateful.
My pleasure. I have a lot of fun with these. So I'll let you all go and we'll talk to you soon.
What are you going to talk about next month?
Shoot, I don't know. That's a month away. You know me. I figure this stuff up 2 days before, not 2 months or 3 weeks or any number like that.
The reason I ask, Jeff, is that it gives me the opportunity to ask our viewers if they have a topic they would like you to.
There you go. And as and I'm perfectly willing to take suggestions for topics. And I'm not shy about talking about anything. Hell, I'll share an opinion on stuff I know nothing about.
I've never heard that.
Sounds like a salesman.
Okay. No, I'm getting out of here. Y'all have a good day.
Safe travel. Enjoy the food.
Thanks. I will.